I was going to test sharing my screen. I had two things. So the plan was to start off with this. Do you all see that image there?
Yes, I do.
Yep.
Excellent. So the plan was to start with that, and then if we need to, I just loaded up the other thing as well. Oh, whoops. Moved it. The other screen, then I have the video here as well. Is that showing up?
Yep, looks like it's
Yeah.
showing up to me.
Screen. And then the other question was, does the audio play through?
Should we be hearing something?
Yeah, that was the question, is if the audio would play through.
I'm not hearing anything from it. I can hear you.
Let's see if there's a way to do that. Share sound. You're having some difficulty figuring out how to share the video that we sent to them. Like they have it set to autoplay. We might have to interrupt it. So
See.
So I asked
quarter
one
of
of
the
the
year.
other SBs, and
by
they
the
said
hour
to have you
of the day.
guys screen share instead if possible.
gotcha. Cool. Do you have that video, Zan? Would you want to do your screen for that? Or if
try
not,
that.
I can.
Let me just confirm that's going to work. Here we go.
And from what I saw, there was just an extra thing you have to tick to say share sound. to
Right,
make
yeah,
sure
it's
that
at the
the share
bottom
sound
when you
works.
share Zoom.
Oh, sweet. Uh, that okay, good. It's just showing the video.
Let's start our analysis with a simple tick chart.
And did you guys hear that or no?
Yes, I do.
Yes,
I hear
yes, heard it.
Affirmative.
Full screen. Oh my goodness.
One tick for
Okay.
each row in our
Oh,
data,
that's good.
where X is defined by the value.
Awesome.
I have to do a little dance with screens, but that should be fine. Because I have full screens on my big monitor, it becomes like, actually, let me see if that works. If I do it there, does it still look okay for you guys? It looks weird for me because it's gigantic, but like, does that look the same?
In this case,
Yeah, it looks okay, actually.
energy.
Just
Cool.
has
Yeah,
some
so I
black
think
bars
so.
on the sides, but seems
But
fine
it
to
had
me.
bars anyway, except white ones, so it's gonna
Yeah.
be, yeah.
Yeah, I've long-term borrowed my husband's gigantic monitor, my big monitor, but there's moments where it's strange.
How's everyone doing this morning? Feeling good? Sorry for the early wake up for the West Coasters.
I'm a little sleepy.
Great. Yeah, this conference starts at like 7 a.m. every day for me.
No, that's tough.
I'm looking at my conference and Discord passwords.
I had actually disabled my alarm for the past month just because our kids get up so early. And then today they slept in. So I woke up and was like, whoa, it's time to wake up. I don't know why, but just today, both of them decided to sleep in. So, yeah.
Yeah, my wife is like handling the kids, about to take them to school right now.
Yeah, same thing. My husband is getting our daughter ready. There's a small chance that you're going to hear some screaming in the background if she decides she doesn't want to go to school. hoping for the best.
That's how it is in 2021.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think
And this
anyone
year,
cares.
the school has like a Halloween activity, so we have to do crazy hair for her this morning. So it's even extra.
Don, I'll bet that you can't use any Zoom backgrounds with those beautiful fish in the background. They would just kind of like move too much and cause a weird distortion.
Yeah, I'm also on Linux and they have pretty bad support for Zoom backgrounds. So stuff gets really weird when I do that. To the point where I think it's gotten better, but
Oh, no.
yeah, not so
that
great.
much better.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
That's it's better for the fish than for you, I think. If the fish were on a meeting, then they'd be all set.
yeah, yeah. It's kind of funny how bad it is, but Linux support. Cool. So yeah, we'll be getting started, I think, in just a couple minutes, and we'll just plan to share our screens for any content that we want to share. Apologies on all of the confusion there. There's been a lot of changes, and they have Discord for discussion and Slide.io. If you want to follow along with that, you can join the thing. Just make sure that you mute ourselves, otherwise you'll see and hear yourselves, which will be really frustrating for you probably because you'll hear it twice. And then otherwise you can open up Slide.io or Discord in separate windows if you prefer. And I'll have those up and I'll keep track of that conversation in case there's anything relevant and interject questions. Just for people's names, just to make sure I'm pronouncing it correctly and saying it, I'll just kind of go through. And if you have preferred pronouns, just let me know if you have that. I'd be happy to introduce that as well. So first up will be Zan Armstrong. Is that correct?
Yeah, good.
Cool. Any preferred pronouns?
I mean, she, her, but
Cool. I'll write it down in
I'm-
case people call it
also-
out in chat.
yeah. I'm okay with not saying it because I tend to not like to lead with my gender, but if everybody's saying it, I'm happy to go along with it too. That's
Yeah,
what
if we don't need to, I can skip it. I just like to ask in case people do have preferences.
sounds
So,
good. Thank you. Appreciate that.
yeah, and then Stephanie Kirmer.
Also she, her.
Cool. And then do you prefer to be called Nick, or should I introduce you as Nicolas or Nicholas?
You can introduce me as Nicolas. Yeah, it's fine. Nicolas Kruchten.
Nicholas. All right. And Kruchten.
Kruchten, yeah.
Kruchten.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm a little bit short on that.
I'm
And
not-
then
I'm not that fussy. It's fine. And he, him is fine.
cool. And then lastly, we have I want to make sure I pronounce it Krist or Krist? Or is it really softy?
Krist.
Krist. Okay.
Yeah.
Krist Wongsuphasawat. Is that right? Or close?
Yep.
Wongsuphasawat?
I think that's good.
Okay. As long as you're comfortable.
Okay, so I'm just gonna do a 20-second countdown and then we'll go live. So we'll start 20, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, 11, oh, I can't count apparently. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5,
All right. Welcome everyone to today's next panel for VisInPractice. Here we're going to be talking about the tools of the trade. Today, data visualization practitioners are flooded with a barrage of different tools at their disposal, anything from many libraries out there from D3 to many others, and to all the different applications like Tableau, Power BI, to entire platforms, things like Observable and Jupyter. How do we manage it all? So today we have a variety of different panelists here to kind of help us kind of understand and explore this space. And we also are inviting all of you to kind of help kick us off, to help understand this space a little bit better. Ask questions in Slide.io. We'll be keeping track of those and bringing those to the panelists as well. So to kick us off, we'll kind of go through each of our panelists, give them a little bit of time to introduce themselves and kind of what they do. And so we can learn a little bit more about that. And then we'll dive into some of the discussions that we have planned today. So again, remember to kind of hop into Slide.io, ask those questions. We'll be keeping track on the Discord as well. To start off, we'll be going through with Zan Armstrong. So Zan here is a data viz developer at Observable, helping people to make sense of the world with data together. And I'll kick it over to Zan to kick us off.
Thanks so much. I'm really, really excited to be here today. Such an incredible panel. Very honored to be part of this group. My own background is actually in data analysis originally. For 5 years at Google, I was on the revenue team and analyzing time series data and understanding all things about Google's revenue. During that, I took a workshop by Cole Nussbaumer-Knaflick of Storytelling with Data, one of her early workshops before she founded Storytelling with Data, and it just totally changed my understanding. And I realized that data visualization was a thing that I could think about. For a couple of years, I used it as a skill as a data analyst, really investing in my visualization skills as a skill to support my work as a data analyst, and then finally made the jump in 2014 to really focusing on data visualization, actually presenting at IEEE, doing research here at IEEE VIS. Did some freelancing, did some work again at Google with machine learning experts and scientists to help them use visualization to do science. And then in June, joined Observable. I'm going to show a little video about some work that a few of us recently did using visualization in Observable. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Here we go. First screen share of the morning. Get that play button to the start. Let's see, here we go, full screen and play.
Let's start our analysis with a simple tick chart. One tick for each row in our data, where X is defined by the value. In this case, the value is the amount of energy used for every hour in 2020 in California. Next, we'll facet by the quarter of the year and by the hour of the day. Already, we can see complex patterns emerge in the distribution of energy used at different times of day and different seasons of the year. As we know, histograms are a more quantitative way of looking at distributions. Let's add those using the rect Y for the marks and plot.bin X to manage the bin calculations. Oops, the histograms are invisible. Let's go ahead and lighten the ticks so we can see the binned data showing through. What else could we try? What about a mean to summarize the values for each quarter and each hour? By filling each tiny chart with a color representing the mean energy used for that group, we'll turn the entire grid into a heat map. Let's swap out Turbo, the default color scheme, for Magma, which goes from dark to light, and reverse the directions, the cells with the highest mean are darkest and lowest mean are lightest, matching our intuition about energy used. Then apply a fill opacity of 0.2. This all is great, but there's a lot of occlusion, and do we choose ticks, heat map, or histogram, or some combination? And should the heat map's colors be strong, bringing the mean to the foreground and focusing attention on that, or more transparent, providing background context? Instead of choosing just one mark or one opacity, we add inputs, a checkbox to turn ticks, histogram, and heat map on or off, and a slider for the fill opacity. After updating our plot code to incorporate the parameters based on our input or a user's input, we're now able to explore our data by turning these marks on and off and adjusting styles. Using inputs in combination with observable plot, we can analyze our data by transitioning through combinations of visual form, not just by changing the data. Each combination gives us the chance to notice a different aspect of the data, to ask new questions and gain new insight. There we go. So that's a little bit of an intro to what's possible with observable plot and inputs combined with visualization. I'm really excited about the flexibility, and I'll drop a link to that later. But today, just really excited to talk about being both a tool builder and a tool user with all this great group here. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for the introduction, Zan. Next up on our panel, we have Stephanie Kirmer. Stephanie here is a senior data scientist at Project 44, a company building the world's most advanced transportation visibility platform. And I'll kick it off from there, Stephanie.
Great, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. Yeah, and I've been a data scientist in practice for maybe 8 years. And I've been able to have the opportunity to practice in a lot of different fields, a lot of different disciplines. And I think that is one of the reasons that it's super exciting for me to be able to talk to this group of folks about how we use visualization, what tools we use for visualization, and the really vital role that that plays throughout the process of anything a data scientist might be doing. And so we'll talk about that more a little later, I'm sure. But yeah, I'm really excited to be here, coming from a social science background into practice of data science. Visualization is hugely important to me being successful and being effective. And so I think this is a great conversation to be having. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Excellent. Thanks so much for that introduction, Stephanie. Next up on our panel, we have Nicolas Kruchten. And Nicolas there is a VP of product at Plotly and leads Plotly's data visualization team. I'll kick it over to you, Nicolas.
Thanks very much. I'm also really excited to be here. So yeah, my name is Nicolas Kruchten. I'm the head of data visualization at Plotly. And I wanted to tell folks just a little bit about Plotly in case they haven't heard of us, just to sort of contextualize some of what I'll be saying at this panel. So Plotly is a software company. We build libraries for scientists, engineers, and developers to create interactive data visualizations and analytical web applications. We have an open core business model, which revolves around two different related open source ecosystems that we steward. The first one we can call the Plotly ecosystem, which revolves around a set of libraries for creating individual charts and maps. And the second is the Dash ecosystem, which revolves around a framework for creating entire applications. So the Plotly ecosystem basically centers around an open source JavaScript library called plotly.js. You can see an example of the kind of charts you can make with plotly.js on the official United Kingdom coronavirus dashboard. Plotly.js accepts JSON specifications for figures and renders them interactively in a browser. It can be used as a standalone JavaScript library, and it works well with React and Angular and Vue and Observable. Plotly.js is a general purpose data visualization library. You can make rich 2D or 3D Cartesian plots, polar plots, ternary plots, maps, tree maps, a wide variety of different visual forms. And around Plotly.js, there's a sort of set of peripheral projects such as the React Chart Editor GUI, which is also open source and available here on the right, as well as the Kaleido static image export system, which allows you to export what would normally be just a browser-based visualization into PNG or PDF. So all that said, most usage of Plotly.js doesn't happen by people writing JavaScript code. A good example of this would be on the right here. The Plotly Express high-level Python API to Plotly.js is more commonly used. To give you a sense of scale, Plotly.js is downloaded about 400,000 times a month on NPM, but Plotly.py is downloaded about 18 million times a month. Beyond Python, folks also use Plotly from R, Julia, F#, sort of more traditional data science languages, MATLAB, and a long tail of other bindings have been built. Within these language-specific ecosystems, folks will either make visualizations using something more traditional like ggplot or Julia plots and matplotlib and convert those figures into interactive Plotly figures, or they'll use our native APIs such as Plotly Express here on the right. We also have quite deep tooling integration into these ecosystems. So within Jupyter, we have dedicated rendering paths for Notebook and Lab. We have an IPy widget. Plotly.r works really well with our Markdown, integrates very well into Shiny applications. VS Code notebooks natively will render Plotly plots, and so on. The second open source ecosystem I wanted to talk about revolves around Dash. So folks in this panel will know, I expect, that for most usages of interactive visualization, we don't really make sort of single figures. We embed them in dashboards and applications. They interact with each other. There are widgets, that sort of thing. So Dash is a framework with a common React front end that most people don't see because they interact with the Python, R, Julia, or F# backends. So this enables Dash developers to write Python, R, or Julia code and have a real interactive feedback path from the server to the browser and back again to build truly interactive applications without writing any JavaScript. Dash apps can contain text, widgets, Plotly figures, but because Dash is based on React, any React component can be made into a Dash app component, and therefore you can have Dash apps with network visualizations that work with Cytoscape.js, Leaflet, DeckGL for advanced sort of 3D geospatial applications, BTK, and so on. So let me pull out just a couple of common themes that really sort of inform my work and what I hope to bring to this panel. First of all, we at Plotly and I personally really love JavaScript and web technologies. That's what we do all day long. But we mostly build tools for people who don't do that, non-JavaScript programmers, people who work mostly in Python or R, who can't or won't learn JavaScript for their day job. And that's really kind of an important aspect of our work. And the second thing is that our work intersects many of what I've called ecosystems. So I've name dropped a bunch of stuff here, language-based ones like Python or R, but also domain-based ecosystems such as geospatial or 3D. And this is simultaneously really fun and exhilarating. And on the other hand, is a really kind of large and complex challenge, making sure that the tools we build interface well with the tools that our customers and users use every day. So that's a little bit of what I bring to this panel. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. You can get in touch with me or Plotly at the links here. Thanks very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that introduction, Nicolas. And lastly, our fourth panelist here is Krist Wongsuphasawat. And Krist is manager of the data experience team at Airbnb, where his team applies data visualization, UI, UX design, and engineering to improve how data scientists, engineers, and others interact with complex data ecosystems. So take us away, Krist.
Hi, I'm really excited to be here and thank you for the introduction. So yeah, this is me. I live in San Francisco with my two opinionated daughter and my wife. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey into data VIS. So when I was in undergrad, I studied computer engineering, which pretty much have like, programming stuff and like coding, software engineering practice. But what makes me feel kind of different from my friend is why they focus more on writing the code that works. I really care about how the UI kind of look, like kind of pixel perfect, or like if things doesn't align, I'm really upset. So when I graduate, I want to learn more about user interface design. So I want to study human-computer interaction. I went to Maryland, and there I met Ben Schneiderman, who like introduced me to the world of data VIS, and like that just opened up a lot of new doors for me. So I spent several years in the more academic research settings. Like one is attempting to do a PhD, which means you have to write papers. But before you can write paper, you have to come up with new ideas. And in the visualization research world, you're going to have to maybe come up with new techniques or like, something like that. And that was like a quite interesting journey. I get to internet, IBM research, and Microsoft research. Some of the work that I did during that time were live flow and outflow, which live flow, it became event flow eventually. A lot of these two are for analyzing event sequence. And you can apply this to log events or like a lot of different applications. So after graduation, I want to write maybe less paper. So I joined the industry, trying to do more application work. And also I'm eager to work with real data, because when I was in grad school, most of the time it's like sample data. So I went to the place that has too much data, which caused a totally different problem, like Twitter. Everything is like gigantic. Like I cannot see the whole data set anymore. I'm trying to learn how to write MapReduce job, or how the so-called big data kind of work. And I joined the analytics teams and also work on experimentation. Some of the tools that we build are like tool for visualizing log events at Twitter. So it can help people understand what is going on the platforms. Redesign how we display the A/B testing results. Like there are a lot of A/B testing experiment going on every day on the platforms, and data scientists and product managers are relying on results from this experiment to decide whether they will ship the product or not. So we build a lot of tools like that. And on the other side is Twitter is, place where a lot of things are happening, and the communications teams want to share story about what happened on the platforms. And one way to do so is through our data, like try to tell a story from them. We made a lot of pieces about the World Cup, Game of Thrones, the Oscars, and a lot of things, you name it. And a few years ago, I switched to Airbnb. Right now, I'm managing the team called Data Experience, which is at the intersection of visualization, UI UX design, and also the core part of it is doing a lot of front-end engineering, because basically we build web applications that has to last, because these are the tools that data scientists or data engineers have to use every single day for their work. So the code has to be robust, but we also want to introduce good UI UX design. And if there are parts that have to display data, how can we leverage the visualization techniques to help them understand the data for their job better? We published a blog post about one of our work recently on how to visualize if your data is late, what happened to the pipeline. There are 10 steps before your data can land on your dashboard, and if it doesn't show up in the morning, you try to figure out okay, which table actually caused that. You can use this tool to kind of hop back and debug that. I also contribute to the open source Apache Superset, which is an open source BI tools, and the VisInPractice library, which is low-level primitive, kind of on top of D3, but combined it natively with React. So in a similar role, working in these different companies, bridging the gap between data and user through visualizations. It came in the form of data applications for data scientists and data engineers, or sometimes storytelling for broader audience. And I try to share through open source and paper and blogs. And most of my days are aside from GR tickets, writing JavaScript and TypeScript recently. And I also like to do a lot of side projects, which some people may have seen. I wrote a blog post 1 or 2 years ago about how can we drink a bubble tea, because finishing the tea before the boba. I run a simulation of that, and the visualization of this tea, they are all built on observable. Last year, I published a paper, which get the best paper for a short paper about configurable grammar. And earlier this year, I gave a talk at Outlier conference trying to summarize or provide a way to think about different libraries that are out there on the web. So yeah, and if you're interested, my website has a list of different things that I randomly do. So that's me. Thank you.
Thanks for that introduction, Krist. And now to kind of kick us off, I have sort of a warm-up question to kind of learn a little bit more about each of our panelists here. Thanks to Krist for actually coming up with this question. So tell us about your oldest visualization project that you remember doing. What technologies did you use to build it, and compare it to the options that you might have today?
I can kick us off if we like. Probably the oldest visualization project that someone else asked me to do, I delivered in Excel maybe 22 years ago. But the oldest project that I remember doing sort of on my own was I was working as a web developer. I was working in PHP. JavaScript existed, but I don't think I knew that you could draw things with JavaScript. And so I used a sort of very low level drawing API to make charts. And I learned all about the fact that you have to compute the text bounding boxes for your ticks and draw the lines, and every little thing that you had to draw, you had to write code for. So that was pretty interesting. That was maybe in about 2003. And I'm very glad that we can do this stuff in the browser, and that we have higher level languages, and that mostly people have written these routines for us now.
Like Nicolas, I think my earliest experience of trying to represent data in a visual form for audiences really started in Excel. I think that a lot of us, especially if you're not coming from a CS background or from a design background will find that that's your first step into taking, data in some sort of tabular form and then trying to represent an insight from it. So I certainly, when I was, working through college and doing, office work and that kind of thing, you end up doing this sort of thing a lot, even if it's just financial data or, administrative stuff. And that certainly was the first step for me in, the path that has taken me now to using, Python and R for my visualizations most of the time in my day-to-day.
Like the others, my first, I certainly had been doing visualization this time in 2011 because I'd been a data analyst for a few years, but the first time I remember kind of really intentionally thinking about it as a visualization was in 2011. I had just taken that workshop with Cole. The tsunami had just hit Japan in 2011. And I was trying to understand how it was what was happening with that tsunami and how it was impacting things. And made a small multiple that had about 9 charts related to that event. And I think what's interesting looking back is that more recently I've kind of codified like what I believe are the small flexible tools of visualization, really being intentional with color, making color meaningful, using order and creating small multiples or facets. And I find that those are like just such 3 small flexible tools that can, whatever tool you're using, applying those principles can be really powerful. And looking back, I'd actually done all 3 of those kind of without having that later knowledge in that really early Excel project. And I think that really speaks to also that like in whatever tool you're using, thinking about how to use that tool to get it to do what you need it to do to see the data the way you need to see it is really powerful.
Let's see, we're going to answer it slightly differently. So I'm going to pick the time that I consciously think that I was doing visualization, because now in retrospect, like, yeah, there were times in my life that I used Excel or other tools to create bar charts. But at that time, I didn't even know about the term data visualization. And like, so I picked this project, which I did in maybe 2008. Like there was like 3-4 years before D3 was originally released, and it's okay that the first version doesn't look like this. This is like after 3-4 years, so it kind of looks more foolish. But the tool I was doing is trying to visualize time series data and find similar ones. And the code that I used at that time was Adobe Flex, which is you write XML part for the layout. And then you use ActionScript to kind of like write the actions, kind of equivalent to doing HTML plus JS nowadays. But at that time, like, the other options are either you do it in Java or like, I don't know what else. So it was kind of interesting experience. But later on, Flash was killed. So all this code goes nowhere. And comparing to today, like, back on those ages, if I don't use this Adobe Flex, I end up writing my dissertation with Java, which was extremely painful to do any really simple things. And like, when D3 was first released, I was like, what? This is totally web-based. I can just, put this thing online and share with everyone. Nobody has to worry about having the right Java version to run my tools. It was like really eye-opening. And now, like, 10 years later, I'm like, oh, I might have graduated faster if we had D3 at that time, maybe, because everything is like so much more convenient. And like you can copy or like learn from a lot of different examples on the internet. But yeah, aside from doing complex lists, like yesterday I was playing Lego with my kids and like kind of realized that actually you don't really need computer even to make visualization. Like, we were thinking, oh, how many block colors we have, and we make this, and you could call it a kind of 3D bar chart if you like. All right, I'm gonna stop here.
Excellent. And to kind of help frame this talk, the next thing, or frame this panel, we're kind of wondering, like, how do we define, the tools of the trade? So let's maybe first start off, like, what do we mean by the trade? So what does that mean to all of you?
I think that I take a relatively wide perspective on the trade in terms of where data visualization sort of sneaks into our work, our practice, or side hustles and projects and things like that. And so I think that lots of people are building data visualizations as part of their day-to-day responsibilities, even though they might not think of themselves as participating in data visualization. In the area of data science, we certainly see this when people are using data visualization as a tool in the feature engineering repertoire. So visualizing the relationship between elements that might be part of your model and assessing those relationships visually can often be a lot easier than doing particular statistical tests on the data or something like that. It can be more intuitive, and it can be easier to represent to others, especially non-technical folks that you're working with. So I think that visualization as a trade is actually sprinkled in to a lot of the work that a lot of us do, even though our title or our sort of background might not dictate that we are official visualization, technicians or something like that.
Yeah, if I can jump in, I just wholeheartedly agree. Like I am personally very interested in the visualizations that folks make for themselves. I find that really fascinating. I find that to be like the sort of core of visual thinking. And I've always tried to build tools that help support the transition from the charts that people build for themselves to being able to have them show those charts and give those insights to others. And so I definitely subscribe to sort of very small v visualization view that maybe there's a trade of folks, a small set of folks who do visualization all day long and are part of kind of an assembly line. But I'm also really interested in sort of supporting folks who are doing a little bit of data viz every day. And sometimes that feels really non-traditional. Like if you are a marketing manager and you're in Google Analytics and you're looking, you're sort of painstakingly configuring those charts, like you're doing data viz. You are doing interactive data visualization. You're configuring the chart to get the view that you need. And maybe then you close your browser and you're done. Or maybe you screenshot it, or maybe you save it for somebody else. But that's the granularity at which I sort of think about the tools, the trade, and I'm interested in the tools that support that.
So yeah, for me, my trade, like as I mentioned earlier, I see myself as someone who bridged the gap between the data and the actual users of it. So like most of the time I consume tools like Plotly or like platform like Observables to build yet another type of tool for others to analyze or view their data. And sometimes also help people communicate their data, either like making diagram slides or infographics, whatever they call it. And on my own, I have personal interest in finding new techniques that can be reusable, like, for this kind of data, how can we come up with a different kind of chart that can do something existing chart cannot do? And those are like the
yeah, like some of the others, I do think of it really expansively. We've been using the word data practitioners at Observable quite a bit recently to have this really expansive view of like people that work with data, people that use data. I think even going beyond that, just I think as data becomes so ubiquitous, it can be kind of felt like an othering thing, that somebody else is using data. And I think having people feel more confident in how they can use their own data, think about the data that affects them, I think that's really powerful. I also think there's this sense a little bit of kind of data in isolation of like, it's what's in the data set. Or people can be really afraid or feel shameful of like, I made this visualization, but it's not good. And the sense of like, it should be better, but I don't even know what better means or how to get there. So to me, I think part of the trade is really like empowering people to see that they are they're already in the trade, they're already part of this, they're already creating, and also to feel more empowered to think about how can they bring in their own context. If they know that above 3 is good in their particular data set, what can they do with that? How can they use that to make decisions about how they look at their data? Or if below 0.5 is bad, that it doesn't have to, that they can bring in the knowledge that they have about the context, about the situation, about why they're using this data, and how they look at it.
Excellent. Thanks for that overview of sort of like what the trade is. And now what do we mean by tools in the panel here?
I think that also becomes a really broad question, because as we were just mentioning, when a lot of us began our, sort of journey in the, just touching our toes into the area of data visualization, we were using things like Excel, which by the standards of a, highly sophisticated audience, like, the IEEE, community, we're not thinking of Excel as the tool that people would be using, but a lot of times people start from a framework kind of like that, or start from tooling like that. And so those are things we need to at least consider when people are coming to, accelerating their sort of learning and data visualization tool kits. For me, in the practice of data science and machine learning, we're using Python primarily, or using R some. We certainly use, the tools like Plotly and Observable that are represented on the panel. And so it's very broad, and I think we're always testing and experimenting and trying a new library or a new tool or a new package to see if it's going to be effective for the specific use case. We're not real tied down to a particular tool, and as long as it's easy to get into using. And I've written some about this in my Medium posts and things like that, and talked about it, because get the data visualization tool or library that is the best for you is one you're going to use and you're going to be able to get going with. And if anyone's interested, you can read those at stephaniekermer.com. But I won't go into a lot of detail like that. But I think this is a broad area. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of libraries that all depend on the use case, depend on what the practitioner really needs. So.
I think my perspective from Plotly is we're sort of tool makers for tool makers, right? We build libraries and frameworks that other people then use to build tools. And so I kind of natively have a very expansive view of what a tool is. I feel like I and my team, we use D3. D3 is a tool for us. We build Plotly. Plotly is a tool for someone else who's going to be building a dashboard. And the chain kind of is really, really deep. Someone is going to use that dashboard. For them, that's the tool. And maybe they save a view. And for their stakeholders, that view is the tool. And maybe someone downstream takes a screenshot and annotates it and puts it in the slide deck. And for someone else, that's a tool. So, there are different levels of creation and use there. But I really think that this sort of notion of a chain that we are all kind of contributing to is an important thing. And so I kind of keep that in mind in my work, that's what I'm doing. I'm building tools for other tool makers. Now that can be really, really challenging and indirect because I don't have access to the data and I don't have access to the users and I don't really have access to anything. But I'm trying to empower others to build tools. And so there's this really, really sort of exciting ecosystem full of parallel chains and loops that I guess we're all involved in different parts of.
Oh, yeah, I think that was a very interesting perspective, and I'm gonna maybe follow from that line of thought. So you have this chain of people who make tools for the tool makers. So I'm probably in the step after you, which is like people who like take those tools that exist and then build tools for people who use data for decision making or trying to use data in their job. So like if you ask me like what my tools are, then I'm gonna look up the chain, and yeah, basically because I spend most of the time making web applications like that can have data visualizations or sometimes produce static graphical animations, then my tools are the libraries like D3, Plotly, Vega, or the platform like observable. Sometimes even use Tableau or Excel as an application, and that also include like high performance technologies for processing data that help me channel this massive information to the users to achieve my goal of first understand the data rapidly, so I can know what to visualize, and then rapidly prototyping until producing a production quality visualization for the users.
Yeah, and I think kind of building on these ideas, I think I came into when I was first invited to the panel thinking about this, I was like, oh, like what am I going to say about tools? Like, have I created enough? Have I done enough? And as we were talking with a couple of the panelists ahead, and everybody said here, I felt much more empowered of like, oh, I'm a tool builder too, both in terms of like creating, as I said, the dashboards we create, the things that we create for others to use, the things we create on top of the kind of more obvious tools are also tools for others. And again, it's kind of like tools all the way down chain. I also love remembering that paper and pencil was also a tool. I once gave a talk to my teammates when I was working in Google research, where I literally I went to Target and bought colored pencils for the whole team and handed them out and was like, draw more. I think sometimes the starting place is like, oh, well, like, what can my tool do and how can I get the most out of that, as opposed to like, what do I want to see and how can I get my tools to show me what I want to see? So sometimes actually going back to paper and pencil and drawing what you want it to be, and then figuring out how to realize that in the tools you have available in a scalable way, I think is really powerful. In addition, I think also just the concepts that we bring to the table. When we talk about things like data viz literacy, part of what we're talking about is what is your conceptual toolkit? Do you like things like what is a scatter plot, and knowing what a scatter plot is a tool, even though we might realize that concept in different tools. And same thing, like using color intentionally is also that tool and idea concept of what you can do, which again, we can realize through various implementation mechanisms. So I really love, and there's also, Adam Pierce gave a great talk on tiny tools a couple of years ago at Open VisConf, where again, I was thinking about like, even those tiny moments, you're like, oh, like I just, like this one thing is a pain. It's a pain to do number formatting, and realizing that is like solving that and sharing that solution is also a tool that we can create. So every time you're kind of like, oh, like this thing is annoying, I can just make it better, and I'll make it better, not just for myself, but somebody else. Or even if you do it for yourself, that's still a tool. And then sharing it. So yeah, I really, it's really cool to see how much bigger the world of tools is than I think even I thought coming into this a couple of weeks ago.
I definitely agree. I just to like circle back, I think that democratization of being tool builders and in opening up that sort of identity a little bit to people is really valuable and exciting. And I think we, practitioners in data broadly, analysts and people building dashboards and stuff, I really like Zan was saying, don't necessarily think of themselves as building tools, but if you look to the end user in the business, they are using that dashboard or that visualization or that sort of back of the napkin sketch even as a tool. They're using it to make a decision, to make a business run. And so the tool builder identity, I think it should be viewed more broadly. So I agree with what you said.
Excellent. Thanks for that point, Stephanie. And that kind of segues into our next question, which we kind of discussed as panelists here to try and identify, like, what are tool builders and consumers? Like, how do you define that?
Mm-hmm. I can say that I kind of started us on that conversation, but I think there's room for debate about that though, because is there a particular perhaps like mindset that goes into building a tool for a user versus building something that's going to be static and that's not necessarily going to involve the end user adapting it. So like an interactive dashboard where someone is going to toggle some buttons and move some sliders to make the end visualization something you as the designer of the dashboard didn't think of or weren't considering. I think that might be a good defining line where you're talking about the tool is going to be mutated in some form by the end user. But there's also, argument to be made that there needs to be more, sort of mutation there. It's a conversation that I think is interesting to have. But regardless, I think it means that when you're building something that's going to be interacted with by an end user, that requires you to think about who is that person? What are their concerns? What are their perspectives coming in? What are they experienced with? And designing even that, relatively, sort of simple visualization or dashboard in a way that's going to work for them, so that mindset switch from I'm building this for me to I'm building this for a user. I think that is a lot of what makes a tool builder.
Yeah, I think tool building and tool consumption, quote unquote, are just like hats that you wear, and you can wear them both in 20 minutes. But I think that distinction of like whether you're thinking about somebody else or not, I think is super important. And in many cases, that's your entire job is building stuff for other people, and in other cases, your entire job is building stuff for yourself. And so I think like that it's a role, not an identity. You can do both. And in fact, some of the most successful things that I've built, maybe pre-Plotly when I was more of a data scientist, were, started out as tools that I built for myself. And then someone would ask me a question, I would pull up the thing that I built for myself, show it to them. And after a while, people would say like, can I self-serve this? Can I, and it sort of snowballed into a tool for other people. So I think that's that distinction of like, who are you making this for? Kind of informs that which hat you're wearing. And it can switch.
Yeah, I think I would jump in. One of the things that I think is interesting, kind of in this space. I think when we often think of tool builders, we think of the person who's building a platform for millions or hundreds of thousands or thousands of people to use. And I think there's this whole space of like, am I building this for me? Am I building this for a few people that I know really well that are doing things that are really similar to me? A few people that are doing something different, but I know their use cases as well. I can talk to them directly. Building for a few hundred people at a company who have a different job than me. Maybe they work, they have a different function, and kind of that continuing kind of that level of like, kind of how many people and how well do I know? And then also the generality of like, am I solving for like a really, really specific, task or a job to be done, or how much that also becomes broad and general. And that, there's kind of different axes, and that you can land any given tool and any given person can land in different places there. You can also transition, and you don't always have to be in one of those parts of the spectrum. But it requires different ways of thinking for where you are on those spectrums.
Yeah, I think I agree that like the tool consumer and tool builder are like two hats that like people just take it like swap very rapidly. Like I like think of myself when I do my work. A lot of times like I start by okay, what is the user trying to achieve? So that is like the kind of tool builder point of view, right? Trying to understand okay, what do they need, and how can that need be met to this different UI or visualization that I can build. And then the questions come back to how do I actually build it? And that's where I swapped over to the consumer and start complaining about, oh, how the heck do I do this in Vega or like JavaScript or D3? Like, is there any examples, or like, is it even possible? And like start like demanding from the up the chain tool builders who provide such libraries to me, like how do I consume their tools?
Excellent. So now that we've kind of like established these hats of both consuming and building tools, let's maybe try and dig a little bit deeper into the building tools mentality. I think that's something that a lot of people might not think that they wear as often as they actually do, as a lot of the panelists here have discussed. And so with that, like, what are any secret recipes for tools that are either widely adopted or that are considered successful or that you consider successful?
I have one kind of thought, which is maybe a little bit surprising is that I think that some of the most successful tools that I've seen are maybe less innovative than the more innovative ones. So I think a very successful tool is one that's not totally foreign to users, and it's like they can do something. They know how to do the thing that they do in Excel in this and more. They know how to do, they know how to relate what this new tool does to something they already know, and so provides this sort of transition path. And so I think the most successful tools are relatable to their users, and they're sort of a nice onboarding path, and they can kind of start using it in this reasonable way. Now, obviously, there are tools which do something completely new in a completely different way that that's totally unexpected. But I think that activation energy to get people to use it, or for people to start using it, is very high. And so maybe my secret tip is sort of, if there's some other tool somewhere else that already does part of what you're doing, like try and do it in a similar way so people don't feel totally lost in using your tool. Don't innovate necessarily just for innovation's sake. Like use your innovation tokens in the places where you're really adding value, and everyone else sort of go with the flow. And so one place where I've personally kind of done this is the Plotly Express API. If anybody is a Python data scientist, looks a lot like Seaborn. Seaborn is great. There was no real reason to do things totally differently from Seaborn, but it produces Plotly plots. So it does a little bit something different and looks a little bit like something that already exists, and provide kind of a nice glide path.
I have a few tips that I would give to designers of visualization tools, but my major ones are write docs, because nobody gonna get started with this if there's no docs to help them get going, especially with examples, please. But also consistent internal grammar, I think, makes a huge difference, because the trick is a visualization user, at least in my line of work, where we're code proficient, we know what we're doing when it comes to reading Python or R. But once you start, you get the basic foundational grammar approach of a tool, you want to be able to tinker and adapt and develop. So if this works with, this keyword makes this thing happen, well, what if I do this keyword? Is that going to make the thing I expect happen? If it doesn't, people get very frustrated and easily drop off. And so I think that is something that I think about a lot when, in the past, when I've evaluated data visualization libraries, particularly in the Python ecosystem. There's some where everything seems consistent and seems intuitive until suddenly you hit a wall where you're like, why doesn't this work? It seems like it should. And that's really hard for a data visualization library builder or tool builder to necessarily come at that from a totally clean, uninformed user perspective. So I think having testers, having people around you who don't necessarily already know how it all fits in your head, and getting their input can be a huge asset there. So yeah, docs and consistent grammar, those are my personal requests to all of you tool builders out there.
One of that makes me think of, I think one of the things, sorry if you can hear that, it's 2021 and my daughter's going to school. Actually, I'll pause for a second. I'll let Chris.
Okay, yeah, no worry. I just sent my kids over to school, so I understand. Let's see. So yeah, for tools, I'm gonna separate it into the tools that I build for the others, which is for more in the data application kind of side. And I think to make those things successful, the key is understand the user's workflow. Most of the time, it's first, what are you trying to do? How are you doing currently? And that can help us at least know their mental model, what they are trying to achieve, and then whatever solution we are trying to provide to them should match that line of thought. So I think the key is that for building data applications. On the other side, as a consumer of libraries and sometimes author of libraries too, I think having documentation is very important. Because you can have an excellent library that do amazing thing, but if nobody know how to use it, that is yeah, totally, like, nobody will know that it is so great. And, it's 2021, and with all these tools available nowadays, like you have the notebook or code sandbox that you can get things up running in minutes. The nice thing is people can get things up quickly, but I think it also make them a little bit too spoiled and like less patience about like learning about different things. So if they look at your library and could not figure it out, didn't have any good enough example, there could be other alternatives or like other ways that they could achieve the same thing.
If I can, sorry, go ahead, Zen. Okay, if I can kind of piggyback on that, I think it's really important to understand how people are currently approximating what you're trying to make better, or how people are currently doing it, and their environment. And so this is something that at Plotly we spend a lot of time doing. Like I said, we have deep integrations into Jupyter and Jupyter Lab, because that's where people do visualization. And so I think it's important to understand where, like what the ecosystem is that your tool fits into, and have it work, right? If your users are using Excel files, then like you should be able to import Excel files. If your users are visualizing in a notebook, it's gotta work in a notebook. If your users are working in Power BI, well, I mean, if you provide them with a totally different thing, you're expecting them to switch, or you need to provide some way of like integrating directly into it. So I think a deep awareness of what people are doing and providing glide paths from where they are to where they're going goes beyond just familiarity, but also just literally interoperability. So just like getting to know your users a little bit, and finding out what other tools they're currently using, and not expecting them to switch wholesale to use yours is an important aspect.
Okay, I think I can do this. I wanted to add on that to me, a lot of it comes down to trust, and like, can I trust this tool? Which has there's a fundamental part of that of, does it do what it's supposed to do? Does the transformation, data transformation work? Does the data end up where it is? Are the bars the right length? And that sounds really simple, but I think with visualization tools, that's incredibly complex in many cases of like, what happens to the NAs, and how do you know what's happening? I'm sure Nicolas is nodding. I see Nicolas nodding. I feel like you're very, very familiar with this. But I think it's really difficult, but I think it's so fundamental. And I think three of the things I think really help ensure that the tool is going to be trustworthy and give confidence that a tool is trustworthy is things like one that's just actually getting actively used, that people are, that you have people using it while it's being developed, and you have, and tool creators are really familiar, have worked with people using their tools, have built tools before, or just that sense of use, like, is the tool getting used? So you're like finding things, and not just with like the small tiny data sets, but is it being used for kind of the ways you expect it to be used in practice? And again, examples and documentation that push and make sure that it's doing what's expected, and then also show people how to do it and give that sense of, ooh, I want to do that, and also, ooh, I can do that.
Excellent. So we've had a lot of great discussion here around sort of these different ways we can help guide tool builders or identified success in projects. And we've had some questions from the audience we'll kind of focus on now, from the tool builder side, I think, and potentially the tool consumer side as well. And feel free to ask more of your questions in Slido, and we'll kind of keep track of those and try and insert them here. We want to make sure we get to those as well. So please add them on there and upvote ones that you want to see answered. And so with that, one of the questions was around sort of web mining suggests that most data viz online belongs to a few types, like bar charts, line charts, maps. So how often do you find yourself creating those kind of basic charts versus more bespoke or unique types of charts in your work?
Well, speaking for the data science and machine learning side, all the time. I made maps this morning. I made scatter plots last night. Yeah, all the time. That's exactly what I end up doing, because those are the kind of plots that are going to help me to see relationships between my data points that will then drive my decision making for the next step in my process. Yeah, I need the good old basic bar, scatter, line, map all the time. and yeah, and sometimes I'm getting into like geopolygons and doing, you know, more complex stuff like that. But I'm using these tools as an asset to help my thinking process move better. And those good old regular plots they're good for a reason. They like help me get there. So that's just me.
Yeah, I think like to answer this question, I would emphasize that the key is what you are trying to extract from the data or achieve from it. Because a lot of times for just trying to understand or get the trends of certain data, like, you know, the basic ones you just do, like most of the time just plot a histogram or bar chart or line chart just to see and understand things. And maybe that is enough because that already captures what is essential story that data can tell you. Because, you know, if it's like, you know, stock price, what are you going to do with it? Draw a line chart, right? But then if your data is more complex or has like more complicated story that is harder to communicate, and you need to like channel this information to others better, then maybe you invest in more bespoke visualization to tell that story better. That's one way. Or if your data is indeed very complicated, like network, and using the basic ones, like, you know, you draw a node link diagram and everything become a hairball, or you try to plot a histogram at the bar chart, line chart, and it doesn't really capture what that data can tell you, then that's when you try to come up with new ways and bespoke visualization to visualize them.
I think there's a lot of assumptions baked into that we often don't recognize baked into like what charts are we using. So as I said, I was a data analyst for 5 years doing time series analysis in Google, in the finance team at Google, working with sales, working with product, working with engineering, working with finance. And in that, I was like always using like line charts, bar charts, pie charts, and even honestly, in that case, a waterfall chart was like a basic everyday chart in that use case. And then I did some freelancing, focused on VIS, came back to Google in research, was working with scientists and machine learning engineers, and we were always using scatter plots and histograms. And at first I was like, whoa, like, it's so interesting that we're using like these more advanced chart types. Like, and then I was like, realized after a little while, like, it wasn't there more or less advanced, like it answers a different question. Like the pie, bars, lines, and waterfalls were all about like how much and what's changed types of questions, and in what categories. And the scatter plot and histograms are much more about what is same, what is different, comparing distributions in a population. And it was more about what types of questions are common than like which chart is the fancier. And actually in that same case, I was working on a material science project and we were doing ternary charts, the triangle-based charts, where any point adds 3 pieces adding up to 1. And then I was like, whoa, these are Zeno charts. And my colleague was like, no, like this is our bread and butter. Like this is what we do all of the time. Like that person might be more familiar with a ternary chart than with something else that we might consider, than a tree map, for example, that we might consider still like relatively common. So I think the sense of like what is standard has more to do with which questions do we ask the most often than like which chart is actually standard. And I think there's also a lot of details around like, if you're even on a line chart or a bar chart, what exactly are you putting? Like you can have a very simple, refined bar chart that has had so much thought go into like, well, exactly which metric are you measuring? Like, why is that metric appropriate? I just did a piece looking at, if you're comparing the difference between forecasts and actuals, like if you care about the difference, what if you actually plot the difference instead of plotting the forecasts and actuals? And so that almost literal, I feel almost silly sometimes when I'm doing VIS consulting that I'm like, what's important to you? And the person's like, the difference is important. And I'm like, great, we will make a mark for the difference. So I think there can be a lot of power even in the most simple charts based on those details of how are you actually, like, what are you actually putting into that simple chart?
Yeah, I think I can answer this question maybe with the like consumer builder hats. So as a consumer, I think we can't take for granted that everyone knows how to read necessarily, bar charts, line charts. Like there's a lot of research being done in data literacy, but I think we can maybe at least posit some sort of gradient that there's like more familiarity with certain kinds of charts than others in certain populations. And so I think that there's a sort of cognitive cost to using an unfamiliar chart that you got to take into account for consumers. That, you know, if you can get something across in a bar chart, then maybe don't use a Xeno chart. Don't use something totally bespoke, because that user has to pay some sort of cognitive cost. They have to read way more and try and understand what you're saying. So there's a kind of trade-off between the cost and the benefit to the consumer of using a more common versus a less common versus a totally new kind of chart that you just invented for this one use case. And sometimes the costs are totally worth it. Sometimes something really, really specific answers the exact question, and it's like $1 million question, and so you got to go for it. So I think that trade-off is pretty important. And on the builder side, speaking as someone who builds like a general purpose data visualization library, it's pretty important that our library be very good and to be very easy to make bar charts, right? That's like, people come to Plotly, they expect people to make bar charts. We have a function called bar. It makes bar charts. It's not an unexpected thing. But then people sometimes feel like they can't make bespoke visualizations, and so there's that trade-off of when you make the sort of basic boring stuff really easy and super formulaic, do you just allow them to make the 7 kinds of chart that you make, or how flexible is it? And so as a tool builder, you're essentially making a trade-off for your users of what's really easy and then what's really hard. So I think that perhaps a library like D3 has kind of like a flat kind of surface where really complicated things sometimes are just as complicated to make as really simple things. And a library like Plotly maybe tilts it a little bit where we make the easy stuff a little bit easier and the harder stuff a little bit harder. So as a tool maker, that's a bit of a trade-off that you need to provide. And that applies, even when you're making user interfaces. Like there are certain types of charts which are really difficult to make in Google Analytics, say, but maybe people don't need to make them as often, and those were the trade-offs that were made. So you kind of have to pick and choose. And at Plotly, we view ourselves as a general purpose library, and so we do kind of try and make the easy stuff really, really easy. Sometimes at the cost of making the more complex stuff a little harder. That's the trade-off we pick.
I just want to jump in. I really love that. I think that's a really interesting thing both to think about for creating tools and also as you're assessing a tool, like the kind of question of like, what is easy, what is hard, and that you can't make everything easy. And so that I think that's a really both. Yeah, I just love what you said both about kind of like, is it flat or tilted, and actually having to make those choices.
You can probably make everything hard though if you try.
I kind of want to add one thing that as a data visualization expert, sometimes you may feel the temptation to build more bespoke visualization, because you feel that if you only do bar chart, people will think that, well, you're not that expert or you're not really doing complicated stuff. So you try to like overcomplicate, over engineer things. But I think the truth is like, even doing bar chart, there are a lot of ways that things can go wrong for the same data, and not every single person know how to do that. So a well-executed bar chart could like worth much more than a complicated bespoke visualization that you try to shoehorn into your project. So keep that in mind.
Excellent. We had a couple other questions from the audience around sort of like tools, when to use them, or how you use them in your workflow. One of them is like, as data viz experts, besides programming your own, like, do you or your company use commercial visualization tools that are created by other companies? And if so, under which circumstances, if you're able to share that information?
We use a lot of open source libraries. I mean, I think that in data science practice, the open source is this sort of dog standard thing we do. But like I said earlier, we use tools from Plotly, we use Observable, we use all kinds of, if there's a tool that neatly fits what we're working on, like weights and biases, they're a great tool that they're not really a singular data visualization tool, they're a model results, monitoring full service kind of thing. But that's a tool that we use. I mean, it's very flexible, and different individuals on the same team might use different kinds of things. Personally, if when I'm, going to, sit down to a visualization test, use Bokeh a lot, but that isn't what other people on my team use. Some people like Matplotlib and Seaborn, and they go in that direction. And some people are ggplot folks,
I can't speak for sort of everyone at Plotly, but I think maybe the approach that I use is sometimes depending on the data, where I've been using Google Analytics a lot. I assume people know what it's like. It's a web traffic analysis tool. So when I'm looking at information about who's visiting our website, who's visiting our documentation, I look a lot at what are the top documentation pages, the ones I need to improve. Definitely, I'll just use the built-in tooling. So sometimes where the data is, there's already tooling, and you can use the data visualization tools that come with your data provider, basically. And there is that sort of extra cognitive and just time cost of being like, yes, I could export all this data out of Google Analytics and then use the tools that I built to visualize it. But I mean, why would I? That's just extra cost versus I can get very quickly to where I'm going. So I think I'm kind of constantly trying to be aware of and run that loop in my head, both for the folks I build tools for, and for myself, of like, what's the extra cost of using tool X versus using tool Y? If there's an import button for my data set in a tool that I don't like, well, maybe I'll just use that one anyway, because I just don't have to like fuss and get a CSV out and import it and clean it up or whatever. So I definitely use this sort of like cost framework to think about what's the lowest cost way of getting to what I want. But if I need to be making an application that I then share with somebody else that needs to be super polished, that cost sort of landscape changes a little bit, and I know that I'm going to be spending a lot of my time really fine tuning things, and then I need a tool that I'm very familiar with that gives me a lot of the fine tuning power. So.
I think this is like, the classic build versus buy argument, right? At Airbnb, we have Tableau, we have, Superset. Now it's like considered borderline because it kind of was built in-house, open source, and now there's a company working on it. And I think like when people use external tools, right, it's based on the use case of what you are trying to enable. And if there are tools that already like established and maybe cover the majority of the use case, you will start to think like, okay, like, comparing to like, do this ourselves, what can we do better? Or like, if not, then maybe we just use the existing one. Like, because, building dashboards, for example, like using Tableau could maybe cover the majority of the use case, enable people to do tons of things. Like everybody trying to build that in-house probably doesn't make that much of a sense. But like Superset, when it was built, the key was to try to have tighter integration with Druid or like some in-house systems. So those are the argument for trying to build something of your own, is you want to have some tailor-made solution that clearly the commercial one is not going to give you, something like that.
I was going to share for just a second. So with Observable, it's very much built in the web very integrated with open standards. And just a couple of, here's on our templates page, we have a few boilerplates of just showing like, yes, of course, you can use it with D3 and with Plot, but you can also bring in processing, Regl, 3JS, WebGL, et cetera. So anything in that, you can do that with a simple, this is the processing example. So it shows how you can use P5JS just with an import statement. And have a lot of these other really wonderful web-based libraries kind of at your fingertips. And this is then where that's pulling in from. It just kind of explains how to bring it in and has some basic examples. But you can bring it with an import statement. So just wanted to give that example. I think of really like that the web is such an ecosystem, and it works better if you can collaborate and use all different parts of it. So we. Even though I personally have been using Observable Plot a lot because I love D3 and I love ggplot, the grammar graphics way of thinking about things, and Observable Plot feels like it has some of the best of both those worlds for the exploratory viz that I really enjoy doing and empowering. That there is, yeah, but lots of amazing tools that are being built and wanting to be able to kind of bring them into one place.
Yeah, and that's a nice segue into another one of the questions brought in by one of the audience members is like with all of these tools out, in the wild, what advice do you all have when it comes to figuring out when should you adopt a tool into your formal workflow?
That's tough. That's a good question because there's so many choices, and out there you can just drown in the options for different ways. I, have, because I'm kind of weird, spent a lot of time exploring differently, specifically Python libraries, and like testing them in figuring out the right way to do a bunch of different visualizations so that I sort of my own personal like consumer reports tests of my libraries. So I have things I look for. I look, if there's a library in front of me that I might want to adopt, but I'm not sure, I'm looking at the docs. I'm doing some, asking people I work with, asking others around me if they're familiar with this, what their experience has been. That's not necessarily, deal breaker. New things often have no like, sort of cachet yet. But yeah, reading the docs, reading the examples, trying to see, checking to see, is there a quick, documentation of how to do, a handful of basic things that I expect. And then experimentation, it takes a little time, but if you try something out and when, don't get into sort of the gambler's fallacy, right? After you've put in a little time, if it still feels kind of clunky or it just feels too like unwieldy or you're not getting where you need to go, chuck it, go on to the next thing. Because don't throw good money after bad when it comes to spending time learning a new library. And then, I think that's my advice to a user who's trying to decide if you're going to start something new. If you have no idea what to use and you're starting for the very first time, I think there are some established good tools that are widely used that are good places to start. I generally tell people to leave matplotlib in the dust. Don't go with that. But there are a number of other good Python-based libraries that are really, I think, good, easy to start with, well-documented, broad communities out there. Boca, Plot9, a few others that are Plotly. Obviously, Plotly is a huge player in that. So that's my advice.
I can bring in yet another kind of trade-off that people you can use. So in certain parts of machine learning or online machine learning, there's the explore exploit kind of trade-off. So exploration is when you're trying new things, and exploiting is when you're just getting your job done as best you can with what you've got. And so I think it's important to, first of all, not have that explore exploit setting on either extreme. If you're spending all your time exploring stuff, you're going to be a data viz researcher and not whatever job you're currently trying to do, which is maybe fine. And if you're on exploit, then you're probably like missing out. So I in my my life before I was a sort of full-time tool builder, I would always spend 10% of my time trying something new. If I've got a new project, maybe I'll try it first with a new library that I've heard of, and then if I get sick of it or whatever, I'll switch back to something I already know. So consciously having it as part of your day-to-day workflow to try new stuff, I think is really important. And then maybe echoing what Stephanie just said, while you're evaluating the documentation, she basically just said like, or at least what I think is you try to do something you've already done in this new library, and if it's easy, great. At least you kind of like have a handhold. If making a bar chart is really hard, then like, well, maybe this is not a bar chart library, or maybe like it's just a bad mental fit for you, and then yeah, you should kind of move on. So that's why I was saying, as a tool builder, kind of try and provide these nice on ramps. So if someone is trying to do something really basic and obvious, like it should either be clearly said like, hey, this is a power tool only for making like really advanced scatter plots. We don't make bar charts, don't try, or provide kind of a nice gradual on ramp. And yeah, it's really bewildering how much stuff there is out there in the world. I think the other thing to know is just like the exploit setting is pretty important. Sometimes you just have a job to do, and it doesn't matter if you do it in Excel. You know, even though Excel is sort of considered unsexy in some quarters, it's fine. It does the charts that it does really well. There's a reason why old things are old, is because they survived. So.
I have one thing that I forgot to mention too, that if you're working in a library, and this goes with the sort of Gamber's fallacy, yeah, if it seems really, really hard, or you're finding that you're just, hitting your head against the wall, don't think that that's a you problem. That might be the library problem. So don't feel bad, or don't blame yourself if it's not clicking or it's not working for you. Even if it works for somebody else, it might not be what you need, and it's okay. It's okay to say, nope, this one's not for me, and move on to the next one. It might be bad docs, might be bad grammar, might be, all number of things, but it's not a personal failing if you don't pick it up.
Yeah, and I think I'd follow up on that I think there's, it's when a tool doesn't, when you're first trying with a tool and a tool doesn't feel, or if you've been using it for a while and it still kind of doesn't feel right, I think there's don't take it that you're bad at things. I think it could be maybe it's not a great tool, or maybe it's a great tool for a different purpose, and the purpose that what you're trying to do with it and what it was really designed for aren't actually a match. But I think it's hard to sometimes evaluate and know what is this tool, what is this tool really designed for? And I think as you're evaluating tools, trying to get a sense of when you're trying it out, can you try it out on the tool strengths? If it's a tool that's really awesome for collaboration, when you try it out, can you try it with another person? This is partially top of mind because we have multiplayer mode and observable. So I think it's a really great way to try it, to actually get a friend on a video call with you and be like, hey, let's do this together. Or if it's a tool that's really, really good at force layouts, great, can you make a force layout in it? And trying to have a little bit of understanding of picking, I think, I'm sorry, I was thinking another example, but I think data wrapper is really beloved by journalists. And are you thinking about presenting something in that context? So I think really thinking about can you try it out kind of in a way that matches its strengths? So you really get to experience kind of the best of the tool as you try it out. Then the last thing I would say is just kind of whatever tool you're using, again, there's that kind of sense of the tool itself, the platform, and also what are you trying to do with it? So I would just encourage you, whatever tool you're using, make sure that you know how to control color, control order, and control faceting. Because I do think that those are kind of universally useful, or maybe there's something that you feel is important. Maybe annotations are really important to you. So making sure that whatever tool you're using, you're able to do your annotations. But yeah, it can definitely be overwhelming, and that it can be hard to figure out oh, how do when you're trying out a tool, if it's hard, is it because I'm not understanding it, or I'm not using it right, or is it not the right tool for me? And that's a really big challenge.
Yeah, I would add on to what Nicolas said about keeping eyes open, and when there are new things, you can try and experiment with them. And what I usually do is when there are new libraries come up, for example, when Observable released the plot library, I try to understand, okay, what does it do? What are its unique strengths? At the basic level, it's just skimming and keep that in your mental space. Okay, this thing exists. If I have time, maybe I play with it, but it's not always the case with every single libraries. Right? And then when next project or the problem come up in existing or new project, you kind of know that there are this solution out there that might address certain things that you could not do with what you already know. But I would discourage just for existing projects suddenly changing things. Unless you have really good reasons, sometimes they're a clear win that, oh yeah, this is going to be much better for our project because X, then if you could convince yourself and others to do the migration, then you can try. But familiarity is also a nice thing because you build your expertise over time. And I think that's also another reason why a lot of people like D3, because they build this knowledge about how this thing works over time, and understand something deeply is some things that take time. And when you switch over to the new tools, sometimes you just have to start from like very basic again.
I can just jump in with two little points that I forgot to mention. One is on what Dan was saying about what tools are for. I hope we're not too guilty of this at Plotly, but sometimes the documentation says one thing and then reality says another. And so I think what's really important there, one way to kind of disambiguate that is the community. So for any given tool, like where do you get answers? Where is the community? Is there a community? Do people, like, if you have a question, is the place to get an answer on a particular discourse forum? Is it in Discord? Is it on Stack Overflow? Like, where do people go? And like, who are they? Like, if you look at the general purpose, VIS tool, and it turns out everyone who's using it is a bioinformatician, well, okay, maybe this is actually kind of a bioinformatics tool or something. So I think the community is really important, and that will actually tell you much more about what you can do with it than the docs, because that ultimately is where you're going to get help. I like to kind of think about the way when we write docs, we're obviously trying to answer people's questions directly, but we're also seeding the community, because I see on Stack Overflow, people answer questions by linking to our docs. And so sometimes I write docs specifically so they can be like the correct canonical answer to a Stack Overflow question. I use that as kind of a guiding principle. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is, I think maybe in the way you framed the question, Sean, around like when does something get adopted as like part of your formal process? I maybe would kind of like poke back at that and be like, maybe you don't need a formal process. Maybe you don't need to have like the one blessed tool that you have to use. And I think part of the answer to that, part of like the reason I think that is because switching costs are actually kind of low. Like, sure, you have to accumulate a lot of like muscle memory and mental memory around a tool, but kind of echoing what Zan said about tools being like the kind of plot you make or how to control color, like that is actually a big part of your tool kit in your head. And once you know like why color is important, then what the actual commands you type to do it are only like part of the equation. And so don't always think that the switching costs are very high. I spent a lot of time working on Plotly, but like you can switch between Plotly and observable plot pretty quickly. Yeah, you might be a little annoyed about what we call color or whatever. But okay, like that's actually not that's a surface. The depth is that you care about color, and both tools will let you do it. So
yeah, I love that you said
switching
that.
costs are low and community matters. Sorry.
No,
Go ahead.
I just love that you said that. I think it's really, I think it's actually kind of a good practice to like force yourself, like it's a little uncomfortable to go through that switching cost. And I think you're right that like sometimes it feels more intimidating of like, oh my gosh, it's a whole new tool. I have to learn like all the things. Where do I even start? And actually, I think as an exercise, just kind of choosing like, hey, like I'm going to go try out this tool. Like I've heard this cool thing about this tool. I've heard this cool thing about Plotly. Like I saw my colleague using it, and thinking about both how to put yourself in the position of like experiencing a little uncomfortable, and then hopefully, but if you choose something specific and small, like don't feel like you have to learn the whole tool. Like, can you be like, oh, I saw this one really cool, say Plotly chart, and I like saw this example, like, can I make something like that? And can I change one thing about it? And really, I think once you do it once, then it's like, oh, well, that wasn't so bad. Like I can do it again with a different tool. And I think also with that, thinking about the community side of like, you don't have to do it alone. And like, if you have a colleague that's using that tool, or a friend, or somebody that you're talking to in the Discord chat right now, and can you like hop on a call with them and say like, hey, can I do a ride along? Can I just like watch you make some charts? Or can we do a pair where we're like, hey, I've been wanting to try out this, like, let's do it together. Because you're going to bring different backgrounds, you're going to bring different ideas. I've personally been pushing myself to like have pairing be my go-to thing more often. It can be a little intimidating at first, because like, oh my gosh, they're going to see all the things I don't know. But I found that people are generally like really kind, and there's so much, like, even knowing what the space of possibilities is can be hard. And somebody else, they might not even know how to do it, but if they know a different part of the space of possibilities, even learning from that could be great. So yeah, +1 to both community and giving yourself a chance to like experience, like minimize the switching costs and feel like you can take them on and feel empowered to take them on.
Excellent. We just have a few minutes left for our panel here today. There was one other question that I think we've kind of addressed, kind of talking about promising trends in recent years for visualization tools. We talked about things like community, documentation, and a lot of other great points there. And like the follow-up to that then that they asked was like, where do we see the tool landscape going? And like, what do we wish future tools could offer?
I can maybe jump in. I think observable is awesome. I think observable is like a really good example of what the one thing that I'm the most excited about, which is these notebook environments. And be they observable and like the super reactive way of doing things, or Jupyter and slightly less reactive way of doing things, which I also love. So to me, the reason that's the most exciting visual tool development in recent years is that because it really is where people can do visualization for themselves in a reproducible way, in a forkable way, in a shareable way. Like those aspects are the most interesting to me. And I think that code is like a really specific, formal, like easy to diff, easy to copy way of doing that. And so the ability to have notebooks, be able to put them on GitHub, have someone else fork them, have someone else run them, is really important. I think notebooks are thought of like as a data science tool, but I love the fact that they have always been, and I think people are noticing more, interactive viz tools. You can put widgets in them, you can put checkboxes, you can have cells parameterize each other, you can sometimes have in one notebook import the other, and I think that bridging the gap between folks making viz for themselves in code and sharing it with others is super important. It's sort of a better marriage between code and non-code. So being able to jump out of a notebook into a GUI and then having that like generate code and put it back in the notebook. so it can be given into GitHub, unit tested, shared, forked, diffed, and so on and so forth. So I think that whole way that folks are doing Viz as a group is probably the most important thing going on in my view. We're way beyond making single charts. We're into making whole ecosystems.
I think for my personal, sort of day-to-day, the Python visualization libraries, they all kind of have gnarly problems. There's really not, like I said earlier that I use Bokeh a lot, and that's true, but it's not perfect, and it has some weird like hangups and hiccups in it. And so I would really like in this, there are underlying technical reasons why it can be very difficult to build a highly performant, like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of points visualization that has a JavaScript backend, because the visual quality of those JavaScript like plots is so amazing. But that is such a grinding heavy thing for the processing part that there's like this sort of like, but I want it to be gorgeous, but I also want to use all my data and I don't want to downsample anything. That I think is in a spot where data scientists right now we downsample mostly, or we use a visualization library that's going to give us kind of gnarly, like pixelated looking stuff. I don't know how we fix that, but it's a thing that I know I and colleagues talk about sometimes. Like, we don't have a ggplot equivalent in Python that is like the one Viz ecosystem to rule them all that everybody uses. We have a lot of little kind of tools bouncing around all over the place. I'd like to, sort of see that mature. That's what I'd say. And no, I'm not, I mean, no offense to Plotly's Python library, which is wonderful, and I also use it quite a bit. It's the best 3D visualization tool in Python, bar none. So.
I'm gonna add like prototyping with data. I think design tools are getting better, and you now can like start having like real data insert into them and do like visual designs. But I still think we can make it even more seamless or like better, because a lot of times like UX designer may came up with a mock of something and like without actually try with data, we never know if that things will like fail miserably or like actually work. So that process can be important. Another thing I often struggle is about data processing. A lot of time we kind of have to assume that, okay, we're going to have a small data set that is in the browser and we're just going to process everything, and then we can visualize it. Or, oh, actually this is much larger. We have to do something on the server side before sending things over to the front end. And having to figure out that boundary is not that great, because a lot of times it's like borderline. I remember there was a workshop at VIS like 1 or 2 years ago talking about how to make this more seamless. Like you don't have to decide. You just say, okay, this is operation I want. And then depends on the size of your data, it just made the right choice whether to do it the other way or on the client side.
This is as much about the tools as the kind of culture and community, but I think that I feel like when I entered DataVis, was like circa 2011 or so, there was a lot of the conversation was kind of about like, here are the things that are bad, like don't do the bad things and you'll be okay. And it was a lot of like, there's all these rules about like, if you like pies are bad, rainbows are bad, other things. I have my whole litany, but like, I think that I feel like even as you can see in this conversation, I feel like we're moving much more just as a community in the ways that we're talking about it, thinking about like good and bad in context. Well, good for what and bad for what. And that's both in terms of like the visualizations we create and also the tools that we create. And I think kind of just like a richer ecosystem of both concepts and tools, and the way that we talk about that is going to help us, I think, both create better tools and use our tools in better ways by just being able to have a more nuanced conversation. So I've been really excited to see the voices of all of everybody else, that my co-panelists and the voices kind of coming into the community or leading the community that are having this more nuanced conversation.
Excellent. And with that, I think that concludes our panel here on the tools of the trade. Let's kind of give a big thank you for Nicolas, Krist, San, and Stephanie for joining us here today and discussing all of this. And thank you all for listening, participating, and let's keep those conversations and questions going asynchronously in Discord. There's a lot of great stuff there. And, you know, this is something we'll be working on as a community to kind of make the tools better, the ecosystem better in the future, and find these formalisms to sort of like figure out how we can build them in the right ways. So stay tuned, and after this short break for our next two panels that will be kind of diving into other aspects of VisInPractice. And thank you all for attending.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
All right, and it looks like we are no longer live. Thanks again, everyone, for your participation today. It was wonderful for this very riveting discussion.
It was fun. I'm so glad that we got to do this. This was great. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you all for participating. I think there was a lot of great involvement and people sharing some of their own like first visualization projects. I'd love to learn some more. We have some like sort of other ways of interacting with people in the conference if you want to try out, which I haven't even done yet, like the Gather Town, a way to sort of like walk around a map and talk to people. I was going to try that at some point later today, and lots of other ways to get involved with the conference. So thanks again, everyone, for helping out, and let me know if you have any questions, and please stay involved with the community. So
yeah, thanks so much for organizing this. I guess my question is if you have one or two, I have not looked at the schedule yet. If there's one or two like panels that you're like, hey, if you're going to catch one thing, catch this, what would you, or not panels, but just like anything, what would you say?
Oof, I mean, the opening keynotes and the closing capstone, those will probably be pretty interesting. I feel like we had the keynote speaker for a similar talk in the past, and yeah, I mean, the VisInPractice panels, we have a couple more yet today that should be pretty interesting. I think the one at the end of the day, sort of about like authoring and like, you know, posts, it's all about like the Nightingale stuff that the oh crap, what's the name of the
DVS,
DVS, Data Visualization Society. Yep. And they've sort of like, I think are going to talk a little bit about that, which might be interesting. If you ever have an interest in writing or learning a little bit about that process, that should be pretty fascinating as well. I'm trying to remember, what is our third panel on today? Yeah. And we have to sign off in a second.
Sure, yep.
And practitioner collaboration. So how people get involved with people. It kind of piggybacks off of this morning's panel, which was about like research and industry kind of switching between the two. And this is kind of about working with practitioners. And then all of this too, all of VIS will be sort of shared and streamed. And so you can always watch stuff after it's been aired if you missed the beginning. So there's a lot of great stuff. If you want to see, I guess there's a whole workshop on observables someone's doing today.
Yeah, I saw that.
So
Awesome.
like there's a lot of content, and thankfully a lot of it's available after the fact. So you should be able to take a look at whatever you want. There's a lot, so it's like definitely worth a filter. But usually the keynote, the capstone, and then like the best papers, which I think are right before the keynote this year and tomorrow, those are usually really good too, because they're sort of like the best papers in the field. And so if you want to get a sense of those, that's another great resource. Hopefully that helps, Zan. There's a lot of stuff.
I just want to say thanks so much for organizing this. And I know I wasn't always the easiest to get a hold of. There's been a lot of stuff going on in my life the last couple of months. So really appreciate just making it easy to contribute and help with the video and everything. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm happy to help, and I was glad we were able to get everyone together and have such an awesome panel. So
yeah, thanks so much.
Awesome. Take care. See ya.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tika Lin, and I hope everyone can hear me. I'm your tech SB, so just here to support the technical issues. And so can we do a quick round of camera and audio checking? So yeah, maybe Matt, can you say something quickly?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Sounds great. How about Jenny?
Hi, I can hear you. Can you hear me
Sounds
okay?
great. Yes.
Okay.
And Renata?
Hi, I can hear you perfectly.
Hi, and hi, Exo.
Hi, I can hear you well still.
Hi, Steve. He's still trying to connect to the audio. So I believe this is a live discussion panel. So it will start at 1 p.m. So I guess I will just give a heads up 1 minute before it goes live. And then I will do a 20 seconds countdown. And then from 10 to 5, I will count it out loud. And then you can all count the last 5 minutes and then you will go live.
So I did have a few slides. I don't necessarily have to use them. Is it possible to share a screen?
Yes, of course. Yeah, please go ahead and try it as well. I will going to make you a co-host as well. All right, Matt, please help share screen and see if it works. Works well.
Okay, sounds good. So I think what I'm going to do here is just give a brief introduction on the collaboration, just kind of give people some context of what this space is. And it's just a couple of slides. If I can figure out how to use preview. Sorry. New computer, new tools, no longer using PowerPoint. And I just want to give people a quick introduction to, it spans multiple disciplines. There's a lot of techniques and visualizations, and there are two sides to this collaboration: domain scientists, physicists, doctors, economists, visualization experts, and there's a lot of wealth of tools, and just kind of give you an idea of what I'm going to say. And the collaboration space is complicated, blah, blah, blah. And then we have a couple key challenges that we need to do to bridge these two worlds. And then I'll introduce you guys and say, we have visualization experts and domain scientists. And then what I think would be good is just doing a round robin, maybe in the order, I'll just call it out. So I'll just go in the same order here. So Cyrus, Janine, Axel, Renata, and Steve, just to give yourself a brief introduction. And then, well, you don't have to be brief. I mean, we have plenty of time. And then I'll just start going through the questions and we can go from there. Does that sound like a plan? Anyone have any questions?
I was just going to say, in terms of introduction, what context do you want us to give, right? Role, but then do you also want us to provide context for our experiences that we're bringing to the table, like as in terms of our roles and how that might shape what we're going to say today?
I think all of that is good information.
Okay.
So you can give a brief introduction to yourself, and then I believe everyone in this room has done collaborations extensively. So yes. Just giving the audience some context to start asking questions.
Yeah. That was my plan of what I was going to talk about, is where I am now, but then how I, a very terse version of the journey, right? So that people understood, had context given however I respond to the questions. But I wasn't sure if there's anything else specifically you wanted us to touch on in the intro.
No, that sounds good to me.
Okay.
And if you think of any questions while we're going, feel free to add them to the list.
Okay. Or
something we want to address. I mean, this is going to be pretty free form, structured just by the questions, and hopefully we make it an hour and a half.
we can embrace the silence and maybe people will engage online, right?
And for the questions, are you planning to just address them directly to us, or like we are supposed to chime in, or like how do you want us to do this?
So I'm going to be monitoring both Slido and the Discord channel.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
we don't
I'll
need to
try
look
to,
at it.
yeah, so these are for the audience questions. I'll try to steer the collaboration, but feel free to take the conversation in any direction you feel would be beneficial to everybody. If that's, does that answer your question?
Yeah, okay.
Well, I was gonna say, I'm not monitoring Discord or anything. So I'm just assuming you're gonna drive and tell us